What's up everybody, Coach Mills here coming at you with a brand new Valorant video, and in this video we're going to be breaking down the biggest reason that you are throwing your games. And the reason is plain and simple. All it is that you're not understanding the requirements for every role and the skill sets for every role, meaning you're not playing every role correctly and you're not grinding the skill set required to have insanely high impact on your role. So without further ado, we're going to break it all down, but the GameLeap website is your one-stop shop. If you want to master any agent in the game, we got in-depth Radiant level VOD reviews breaking down play by play exactly what you need to do in order to climb and carry every single game you come across in Valorant. And we have mechanical courses, map guides, and much more. Do yourself a favor and go check it out in the links down below. But without further ado, let's jump into the video. Now, the first role that we have to break down in the video is none other than the Duelist. And there are 4 Duelists in the game: Jett, Phoenix, Raze, and Reyna. And if you're a Duelist player or a Duelist main and you're struggling to climb, you are most likely throwing tons and tons of your games by not playing Duelist correctly. The first and biggest mistake that many Duelists are making is baiting. And a lot of people don't quite understand what this means. This means as a Duelist, you need to be the first one to always engage. You shouldn't shy away from 1v1s, and it's your job to clear out site as quickly as possible. When you actually are initiating onto a site, not in the zone where you're playing default baiting out utility, but actually committing, you need to be aggressively swinging around the site, you need to be aggressively clearing every corner, and you need to of course use your utility to do so, whether it's paint shells, taking a duel aggressively and using your dash to get away, flashing around the corner, whether you're Reyna or Phoenix. You get the picture. You're essentially trying to clear the site as quickly as possible once you're going in. Now, a big thing a lot of times with Duelists, especially in the lower ranks, they'll get very upset when they don't get players refragging them. And the thing is, yes, refragging is a mission for a lot of the other characters or the other roles on your team, but as a Duelist player, you need to go in as if you don't even need a refrag. You need to go in as if you're going to one-tap every single person and just roll them using your utility to set up your engagement. As a Duelist, you should be cocky, confident, and you should never be afraid to take duels. And as such, Duelists are required to have the highest level of mechanical skill. If you want to main Jett, Phoenix, Raze, or Reyna, and you want to consistently be confident and take these duels, you need to be putting tons and tons of time into your mechanical skill, because whether or not you convert or don't convert on these kills, I mean, that's basically just mechanical skill and ability use. And if you can't capitalize on this, you're going to be initiating and then dying, and it doesn't matter anything else, right? That is why you need to be putting the most effort out of any other role into honing your mechanical skill. And of course, we have other videos on this channel about improving your mechanical skill and tons of mechanical guides on the GameLeap website. But moving on to the next role, and the next role is Initiator. And there are only 2 characters in the Initiator role, Sova and Breach. And you are most likely throwing on Initiator doing 2 things. The first thing that Initiators are doing that is throwing games is they are running onto point as if they are a Duelist. The thing about these characters, even though one of them has some aggressive utility, Sova does, and the other one, Breach, has flashes in the same way that other Duelists do, these characters really want to utilize their utility. This means that a Breach doesn't want to flash one time, peek, and die first. This means a Sova doesn't want to recon drone, swing the angle, get 1 kill, and die because he's not going to be able to use his utility later on. These characters are all about setting up your Duelist first off, and second off, using your utility to aid in site control. This means flashing for your Duelist to peek. This means recon or droning to get info as your Duelist swings around. And this also means when your Duelist swings around a site or tries to clear a site, if they kill 1 person and die, you should be the refragger to trade out with those kills. It is extremely important that you are typically the second person to go in and follow up with your Duelist or follow up with your second Duelist. Now, Initiators need a high level of mechanical skill, just enough to consistently refrag and of course take duels, but they don't need as high a mechanical skill specifically with gunplay as the Duelist, but they do need even more mechanical skill with their ability use. Understanding exactly how to use your abilities, whether that means Sova recon rollouts, Breach flashing the appropriate places or flashing in a way that doesn't flash your teammates, setting up ultimate plays that really could interact with spike diffuses and things like that, initiators need a pretty solid balance of a high level mechanical skill and a high level of gunplay skill as well. Now moving on to the next role that we have to break down in Valorant, the controller role. And people in the controller role are throwing all over the place, and I think that this is the role that most consistently has players not doing their job. Everyone understands that you need a smoke player. Everyone says we need a smoke or else we have a terrible team comp. But if your smoke player is not playing correctly, it doesn't really matter if you have a controller, right? I mean, they're just not doing their job, so it doesn't even matter. You basically don't have a controller if your controller is not doing his job. So let's break down what they are and where a lot of controllers misstep. But before, let's list them in Brimstone, Omen, and Viper. Now, the first thing a controller is supposed to do is smoke off sightlines for easier clear. Now, this is pretty obvious. You smoke things like Heaven and you smoke sightlines where you don't want to have to challenge them with gunplay, and they have a really powerful vantage point. Typically, power angles are what you want to smoke off. Now, a lot of controller players understand this concept of a controller player, but the other concepts of using their smokes, they don't really understand. For one, defensive smokes is something that a lot of smoke players get wrong. You see, when enemies are trying to push onto a site, if there's a smoke at the entrance from the site onto point, and not oozing onto point, but blocking it off to where it oozes into the default lane of where they're pushing and not onto point, if an enemy gets to that point, it's really hard for them to push onto sight because they are basically pushing out blind. You could hypothetically be holding any angle, and if an enemy pushes to the smoke, you're going to have that advantage because it's very unlikely that they're pre-aiming you. This is why consistently using defensive smokes is one of the most important things that you should be doing on a controller, but a lot of controller players don't really understand this concept, and they're using their smokes on attack, sure, to block off these powerful angles, but they're not using it defensively, which, I mean, that's just like one of the essential jobs of a controller. On top of that, controller players don't understand that when you are smoking certain lines of sight, it can be worth exponentially more value than doing other smokes that can block up LOS from longer sights. Let me give you this example. Let's talk about Haven, right? Smoking the A cross, the cross from A to long, smoking that is almost always the most important thing that you could be doing on a controller, regardless of where y'all end up pushing. The reason for that is it puts extra pressure on the A players. They think maybe they cross through A short, the A long player has to back off because they don't know if they're gonna push out of the smoke or push through A short, and it basically ensures that they are not going to rotate off. So whether or not you're pushing through and trying to make a play through short, or you're pushing an entirely different site, just that smoke alone creates so much pressure and makes it so it's a lot easier to clear C or B because there'll be less people on the site and it's less likely for them to rotate, and it's a lot easier for y'all to defend the site once the spike is down, and then the enemy are going to rotate late, and then the pressure of course is on them. You see, controller players get to make a lot of these plays, and this is why it's so important that controller players really understand the macro of what's going on. And what I mean by that is they need to understand the entire battlefield, where you're trying to move to, what the point of each individual smoke is, and generally calling for plays and different sorts of things that the team should do. They also don't require the same level of mechanical skill as a lot of these other characters that we talked about, specifically initiators and duelists, but having great mechanical skill is always a plus. But the more important thing is understanding your role and making sure that you execute it every time, because consistently good smokes is going to set up your initiators and your duelists for such an easy time taking site control. Being able to challenge a site with less people rotating and less angles they have to clear makes it easier on their utility, their mechanical skill, and makes it easier for them to refrag. Controllers are the backbone of every team, but it's the role that the most amount of people are playing completely incorrectly. Now moving on to the last role, but certainly not least role, we have the Sentinel role. And the characters in the Sentinel role are Cypher, Killjoy, and Sage. Now Sentinels have a lot of different roles, and some of them differ depending on the Sentinel that you are playing, but the most important things that Sentinels need to be doing are relaying info across the map. They need to be trying to deny flank plays, stall points, and provide extra power in utility, because their utility seems to be some of the most powerful in the game. Now, something that's extremely important about Sentinel players is they are the backbone of every team. A good Sentinel player can make or break a team, and it's not based on kills on the board. It's based on stopping enemy plays and making it a lot harder for them to get value. You see, a good Sentinel player is very similar to something like a goalie, where they keep every single other player on the enemy team in check, and a good Sentinel player can feel like a wall, because a Sentinel Cypher, for example, that has one-ways on sights, creative trap wires that are consistently moving, an unpredictable playstyle where every once in a while he plays aggressively and gets some kills, or most of the time he plays defensively and he almost always puts in pressure on the enemy. Basically, what I'm saying is the more difficult you can make it for the enemy, the harder you can make it for them to execute on their plans, and basically the more annoying you are, the more impact and value you're going to be having. Essentially, every time someone tries to play into you, you want to give them the hardest time possible. They think, hey, we don't even want to push this site because this Cypher has one-ways, he has traps, I don't even know where, we have to clear them, and when we finally do and we push in or our jet dashes to the trips, she gets shut down right away. Now, going back to denying flank plays, specifically Killjoy and Cypher are so important for doing this. Just consistently setting up some sort of utility that can give you information and stop any potential flank plays, or just giving you some idea about where enemies are routing to. This is incredibly important, and this is why it's really important for you to not only just think about, oh, an enemy could flank from here, but also think about where is an enemy likely to be positioned and where can I set up my utility to give me some information about where they routed to, and then use all that combined to kind of give yourself an idea of where they are without them inadvertently just telling you where they are. Basically, a Sentinel player is like the brain of an entire team composition. You need to be constantly thinking about the game state. You need to be thinking about where enemies are rotating. You should typically be tracking things like what characters still have what abilities and how close they are to ultimate. At the same time, you should also be relaying as much information as possible, because not everyone on your team is going to be able to always know what information you're gathering. And for example, if your Duelist is engaging enemies, they might miss some things, like some little blip on the minimap or different things like that, that you as a more passive role should always be cognizant of. Essentially, Sentinel players might have some of the lowest mechanical skill required, but it does have one of the highest amount of game sense required. It requires you to be constantly thinking about the state of the game, thinking about the macro strategy of the game, and doing everything you can to stop an enemy from getting a ton of value, stalling their plays, shutting them down, making them feel like you are a nightmare to push through. You get the picture here. A good Sentinel can feel like an unbreakable wall that enemies really have to work so much harder to push through and get value through, and the enemy Duelists are gonna absolutely hate you. But of course, mastering any of these roles start with mastering any of these agents, and we have in-depth Radiant tier agent courses on the GameLeap website. So if you want to master any of the agents from any of these categories, do yourself a favor and go check them out in the links down below, and you're gonna start easily being able to carry your games. But if you have any questions, definitely let us know down below. Thanks so much for coming by. I'm Coach Mills, and of course, until next time.